Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. So this is my regular Wednesday series where we talk about some aspect of making music using MuseScore. And usually there's a particular topic we talk about and explore that topic. Sometimes there's other kind of themes of what's going on. Today's topic is going to be parts, which was supposed to be the topic a couple weeks ago, but snow got in the way. The power lines went, whatever, the internet went down. So I couldn't really do justice to the subject of parts. So I'm going to talk about it today. And yeah, we'll talk about just different aspects of working with parts in MuseScore. So, as is always the case, okay, so first of all, thanks everyone checking in. Love seeing the chat, people talking about where you're coming from. And uh, I will be demonstrating primarily with MuseScore 4 as I typically have. I know that there's still, people are still in the process of making the transition or thinking about making the transition. And for a lot of things about how MuseScore works, it's really basically the same. It's just maybe a different button to push here or a different something, whatever, a different way of getting at it. Parts are one of the aspects of MuseScore that is maybe most significantly different. There's still a lot of similarities, but there are perhaps more differences in how parts work than almost anything else between MuseScore 3 and 4. So I will be showing with MuseScore 4, but if there's something in particular that I need to refer to, well, here's how to do that thing in MuseScore 3, or to point out, oh, you couldn't do this in MuseScore 3, I'll be pointing those things out as well. All right, so first, let me talk about what I mean when I talk about parts. So what I'm talking about here, so if we look at the MuseScore Café theme that we've, seen and heard many times, we are looking at the score here. So if I talk about parts, what I'm not talking about, although it's related, are the individual staves for the different instruments, right? This is the staff for the guitar. But when I talk about parts, in particular today, and what I'm going to be focusing on here, I'm not talking about the guitar staff within the score. I'm talking about the fact that there's a tab here that says guitar, and when I click the guitar tab, I am now seeing just the guitar part. So this terminology is hundreds of years old, in fact. Part book format is what they called how choral music was distributed back in the Renaissance and Baroque era, where instead of the vocalists reading from the full score, they were reading off just their own part. The altos just saw their part. The tenors saw just their part. And that's how scores were actually published in the early days. So that idea of calling these parts goes back a very long ways. So this is what typically happens in published music. You'll have a score that shows all the instruments, and then you have the individual parts for each instrument. And so that's what I want to talk about, is this process of creating these parts and working with these parts and how they kind of all interact, all right? So let's go ahead and flip over to a score that I'm using as a demonstration. And I will put in a little plug here if you haven't already started going through the Mastering MuseScore 4 course. In fact, I got to actually do this. I got to flip over here and show you a little bit about where this course actually is right now. It's going to be continuing to be developed, but at this point, it's really close to as complete as it might need to be. So when I go to the Mastering MuseScore 4 course here, and I will put the link in the chat, just in case someone hasn't managed to find their way to the course yet, I will post the link. There's the link to the course. And yeah, if you haven't enrolled, you got to go through all the rigmarole to do that. But I want to talk about what you'll actually see in the course. So what you'll see are all these lessons here. And what you'll see is right now there are 22 sections, 139 lessons, right? So there are all these different sections and so forth. And what we're going to be looking at here is in a couple different places. So we're going to be looking at lessons that relate to notation, instruments, staves, and systems. This is the section dealing with parts. And what you'll see is there's a lesson called parts and another lesson called additional part features. The parts lesson has the little race car on it. That means that this is the stuff I think pretty much everyone needs to know. The one that says additional part features doesn't have the race car, and this is like additional information that, if you're trying to get more advanced into parts, use some of the more advanced features, you'll find that here. So in general, the race car lessons are the ones that you should be you should be hitting first if you're like just trying to get up and running. So we're going to be talking about stuff that's in both of these lessons. So the parts lesson has been around for, when I first opened the course, that was already present. The additional part features one I just uploaded within the last week or so, because in fact there's some new stuff coming in 4.0.2, which, okay, I said last week I thought it was going to be last week. This week I think it's going to be this week. Martin actually said out loud, or typed in pixels, that it would happen this week. So in any case, the 4.0.2 release is going to have a couple little new things for parts, and so I wanted to hold off on that lesson until I could be demonstrating with that. So that's what I'm looking at here. So if something looks any different, that's going to be why I'm using 402, a test build of it. All right, so we've got our score here, and it's for strings and piano, okay? So violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, and piano. So what I want to do here is just go ahead and generate all the parts. Before I even do that, though, I have to address a point of confusion that often comes up. And this is sort of a new thing. If I go to File, and then, let me think. How do people get there? Export. If you go to File, Export, you'll see that the option to generate to export these to PDFs, this already exists. You don't need to actually generate all those tabs to view the part, to print the parts. You could print the parts directly from here or export to PDF. Can you do that from print? I don't actually remember. File, Print. No, I'm going to say no. But you can export to PDF without, or any other format, without actually generating the parts. That's something that's new in MuseScore 4, the fact that the parts kind of already exist, whether you do anything or not. But assuming you want to do any editing, any customization of how the part looks, we're going to want to generate the parts so that we can actually see them. So I'm going to click the Parts button on the toolbar here. If you're in MuseScore 3, it's going to be File, Parts, and it's going to bring up a dialog. The MuseScore 3 dialog looks very different, but it will have a button that says, what does it say? Open all parts, or all parts. I think it says all parts because they keep changing the label on it. Right here, what I'm going to use is the one that says Open All. And when I click Open All, what you'll see is I now have those tabs for all the parts. That happened really fast, right? So there's the score, and here are all the individual parts. So in the most general case, that's all you need to do, okay? So if that was all there was to talk about, right, this would be a very short episode, but there's much more that we can do with parts here. So let's talk about some of the things, and if you all have questions, feel free to ask. So one of the things that I'm noticing here is that this part is called Piano 1. You know why it's called Piano 1? Because at one time I added a second piano to this score, and then I deleted it, and then it's still called Piano 1 now. So I don't want it to say Piano 1 anymore. You might have some other reason, like you might want to decide that your part shouldn't be called violin, like that kind of one. Maybe you want Roman numeral 1 there. Maybe you want the violoncello part to just say cello, right? You might want to change the names of the parts. So let's look at this. Let's go to Piano 1 here, and let's just make it say piano. Mostly, you're not going to, that's only because I was adding a second piano part. You're not going to normally have that issue. But if I go here and just double click that text, now it just says piano. Notice the tab, though, still calls it Piano 1. And I think if I go to File, Export, it's still called Piano 1 here. So the question is, where is that name coming from? If I look at the score, you'll see it just says piano here. So I want to clarify something about naming. There's several different names. And this has always been true in MuseScore, like from version 1, and then it changed how it worked in version 2, and then it changed how it worked a little more in version 3, and now it's changed a little more in version 4. But the specifics have changed, but the general idea has remained constant, that there are independent controls over how this name appears in the score versus how this name appears within the part versus what actually appears on the tab. So I'm going to try to show how to get these things happening. So we can see that the staff name is already what I want, right? And so that was already the case before I started. When I'm viewing the piano part, I've edited what appears on the part to just say what I want. But this pesky matter of the tab name and where is this coming from? Here's what I think. I think if I go to the parts menu, select that piano 1 part, and click the ... here, I will see a rename option. And now I can rename it to just say piano. While I'm at it, let me take the cello and rename it to just say cello. So, now that I've done those things, my piano part just says piano here. Yay. My cello part just says cello here. Yay. And if I go to File, Parts, yay, it says cello and piano. So yeah, that's the thing. You have that control over the naming of things. So now I've changed the name on that tab there. Let's also get the cello to just say cello. Hey, look at that. When I double clicked it, it fixed itself automatically. That surprised me. That really surprises me that happened automatically like that. Huh. Because I can edit this to say something different, and when I do that, it doesn't update the tab. But whatever, okay. So I guess there's something in place to make that happen automatically that I didn't even know about. But let's go back to the score. The score still says violoncello, or how you do this. So Dave, I'm going to come back to your question about hidden parts in a second, and take a look at that, because I'm still wondering, actually, I can't remember where that piano 1 business came from. So I want to name the violoncello to just cello. So I'm going to come over here to the Instruments panel and open up this. Actually, I think it's here in the gear icon on the instrument itself. Name on main score. Here's where I can change this to just say cello. And maybe have the abbreviated name just be C. There you go. So now the score also looks the way I want. All right, so now let's talk about the idea of hidden instruments. Let's say that we decide we don't want the cello. We don't even want the cello here. So I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm going to hide it, because that's what Dave is asking about. So to hide the cello staff, I can click the icon here for cello, and now the eye icon, and now you see the eye is closed. So I want to make one observation, and actually I'm not going to do it with the cello. I'm going to do it with the first violin so that we can hear this happen here. Let's listen to this. All right, so that's what it sounds like. If I take that violin 1 and hide it by clicking that eye icon and now play again, it's not playing that part. We don't see that violin part, and we also don't hear it. The melody is gone. You don't know the piece. So hiding an instrument will actually mute it as well. However, what you can do is come back here, re-show that violin 1 part, and this time hide the staff for it. So I've clicked the little arrow to open up violin 1 so that we are seeing its staves, and now I can hide the staff for the violin without hiding the violin as an instrument. Now when I play it, we're going to not hear the violin 1, but we won't see it, but we will hear it. We're hearing, that top note we're hearing is the violin 1. My that long note, that sustain. That's the violin 1. So so hiding a staff is different than hiding an instrument. That's one point that I want to make, because that's like an important new thing in MuseScore 4. MuseScore 3 didn't have that ability. You couldn't go in like on the piano part, I could go in and hide just the top staff or just the bottom staff. That wasn't possible in MuseScore 3, but it is now. So I'm going to re-show the treble clef here. Oops, I guess I need to actually click it first. Sometimes that's a little funny the way that works. So let's go back to hiding the violin, because now we're kind of getting more to just, I want to get now more directly to Dave's question. So we've hidden the violin in the score. However, it doesn't affect the parts. There's still a violin 1 part. Now, if you don't want to see that violin 1 part, you can close it. Bye-bye. But you haven't really destroyed it or anything. It's still there. And if I go to the parts menu and reopen this thing by, say, open selected, there's my violin 1 part again. In fact, watch this. I'm going to add some formatting. I'm going to add a line break there, add a line break here, just so you can see that something has changed. And I'm going to close that part by clicking the X. By the way, you couldn't do that in MuseScore 3 also. So if you had a score with 27 instruments, you were stuck having those tabs open all the time. So I just closed that violin 1 part. I'm going to go back to parts now and click that violin 1 part and say open selected. Oh, crap. All right. Did it crash? It crashed. Crashes happen, unfortunately. So, not happy about it, but that's what happened. So, yeah, I had a couple crashes yesterday, and then last time, and then I tried to, figure out how to reproduce it so I could submit a bug report, and of course I couldn't. And so that's probably going to be the case here. So it's this guy right here. So, I'm going to regenerate my parts. Open all. I will return to Instruments panel. And again, so really what I want to do is show that if I add some formatting to the violin 1 part, like adding that system break there, and then close the part, and then go back to parts, select it, and open it again, it crashed again. Wow, that's not good at all. All right, so now we've at least seen something that seems like it's reproducible. So I need to try this one more time, and if it crashes again. But see, the thing is, I just did this exact same demonstration last week when I recorded the video for this, and it worked as expected. So I'm not sure why it's not now, but I'm going to try it one more time because I'm a glutton for punishment. Violin 1, add a system break, close the part, go back to parts, violin 1, open selected, crash. So, there you go. Let me answer Marla's question, because it's an interesting one, and it's why it defaults to that. It's why your question is a good one. Why would you want to have an instrument that plays even though it's not visible? It's not a super common thing to want to do, which is why the default is part of the reason why the default is now to make it not play when you hide it. However, look at my piano part here. I wrote in chord symbols, and then I wrote in all these chord voicings here. If you're writing jazz charts, you're going to want all the time to be able to do things like just have a part that is there for show, like a part that just shows the chord symbols and slashes. And then you're going to want to have another piano instrument, or a staff anyhow, where you actually have all the notes written out. Well, you're going to want to see just the chord symbols and slashes, but you're going to want to hear all the notes you wrote out. So by hiding the staff where all the notes are written out, but still letting it play, you can get that effect. Also, Marla, thinking specifically about harp. Imagine writing out a glissando with some specific pedal pattern, and you want to hear that glissando play using the notes of that pedal, using those specific notes. You might have tried to do this by putting in a custom key signature that reflects your custom pedal pattern, and then setting the glissando to be diatonic. That might work. But another way of getting that effect would just be to put in the notation the glissando, disabling its playback, and then just adding a separate harp part and writing out the dang glissando, right? That sort of thing of there's some notation that's not necessarily going to play back exactly how you want. You can write the notation and then on a separate invisible staff have it play the way you want. So this is super common. Okay, so Bob's talking about using it to have the accompaniment. Yeah, if you've got a choir score, maybe you want the accompaniment not to be visible because you're just wanting to look at the parts. So there's another perfectly good reason to do that. All right, so if someone can remind me when we're done that I want to report this bug about that crash, because I was able to completely reproduce it. What I'm wondering, though, is why I wasn't able to reproduce it when I was testing before, and I think it's because I didn't use violin 1. So I got to make one more attempt to crash here by doing this with the viola part. I'm going to take the viola part and add my system break. I'm going to close the part. I will go to parts. I will click viola, and again, open selected. Hey, there it is. Look at that. So it only crashed with the top staff. Now this score, I have to say, I created during the pre-release MuseScore Alpha, so it's probably all sort of weird, and maybe it's not reproducible in a new score. Okay, so let's talk about what my point was supposed to be here. I added that formatting, right? Let's add some more formatting. Let's add another break right here, and another break right here. I now have 3 system breaks. I then close the viola part. And now I come to the parts window, and I click it and say open selected, and that viola part is back with the formatting intact. So that's an important thing to realize here. When you close a part, you're not doing anything harmful. You're just reducing clutter. So if you've got a score for a whole symphony, you can declutter it that way by just closing the parts you're not caring about at the moment, and then reopen them later, and you don't lose a thing. Now let's come back also to Dave's question about hiding things. Notice that in the score, okay, I've got everything showing in the score. Let's come over in the score and hide violin 1. Violin 1 is now hidden, but its part still exists. In the part, violin 1 is showing. But notice the part actually lists all the other instruments. This is one of the really sort of significantly different things about how MuseScore 4 treats parts. In MuseScore 4, at some level, every part contains all the instruments. They might not be visible, but they're there. The violin 1 and the violin 2 and the viola and the cello and the piano are all available here within the violin 1 part. So what this means is you can do things like what I'm about to do. Let me play this. Okay, so there's the violin 1. What if I say, hey, I want to see the piano along with that? Well, I just show the piano along with it. And now I can see the piano and violin 1 together. I think I've got I've got some weird thing going. The slash notation. This score was created many years ago before MuseScore even had slash notation. So these are all being faked there, so it doesn't sound very good when you play it. But the point is, you could, within the violin 1 part, I'm able to show the piano. And I could also show the violin 2. Let me hide the piano since its playback is going to be kind of wonky. If I start playing now, it's going to play. Right, it's playing both parts. The parts that are showing are the parts that play. So again, this is a new thing in MuseScore 4, where in MuseScore 3, once you created a part, you were locked. You couldn't decide you wanted to see additional instruments or hide instruments within the part. Once the part was generated, it was kind of locked. In MuseScore 4, you have complete freedom to, while you're looking at the violin 1 part, also show violin 2. So that it's really easy now to print out this part and let the violin 1 and violin 2 read off the same page if you find that useful. Maybe it's maybe a little more useful if it was, say, vocal parts. I think that would be more common to do that. So anyhow, that's one of the new things here, is that in the visibility of instruments in the part is completely independent of the visibility of the instruments in the score. In my score, I'm showing all instruments except violin 1. In the violin 1 part, I'm showing violin 1 and violin 2, but none of the other instruments. Completely independent. Hiding instruments in a score does not affect the parts, and hiding something in a part or showing it in a part doesn't affect the score. Completely independent. So this allows for all sorts of interesting things, like I could generate a part for just the strings. Let's do that. I'm going to say parts, and I'm going to say create a new part, and I'll come over here to the ... menu, rename it to say strings, and open selected. The strings part that I just created is initially empty, but now all I got to do is come here and open the eyes for each of these instruments that I want in my string part. And now I've got myself a string part. Now, it was possible to do that in MuseScore 4 also, in MuseScore 3 also, but you had to set it up when you immediately. Like, you couldn't then change your mind and say, you know what, I don't really want to see the cello after all, because the cello I'm using more as a bass here and it's part of the rhythm section. So you couldn't change your mind about which instruments you wanted to see in which parts in MuseScore 3. But you could, in the parts dialog from MuseScore 3, go ahead and you could put multiple instruments into a part. So Dave's question here is a good one, and this also has not really changed in any significant way. Yes, if you make a change in the score, it is reflected in the parts and vice versa. So for instance, here's the piano part that's got those two middle C's here. Let's go to the piano part here. We see our two middle C's. If I take those two C's, raise them up an octave, and then go back to the score, they're raised up an octave there. So all significant changes you make to the actual content of the music, actually adding or removing notes, changing pitch of notes, changing, dynamics, changing text, all the changes that you would expect to need to keep synchronized will keep synchronized. The things that don't keep synchronized are the things that you generally don't want to keep synchronized. So let's talk about an example of that. Let me see if I can find one. I'll make one up if I don't see a good case. All right. Here's one here. It's not a great one, but you'll get the picture. I've got a dynamic marking here and a chord symbol here, and they're close enough together that maybe it's a little confusing. It's not really, but pretend, okay? Pretend that these two markings were just close enough together that it was a little confusing. And we thought, hey, let's fix that by, in the score, moving that dynamic marking over a little bit, and then that's going to reduce the confusion. So if you make a manual adjustment to the position of something, if you do that in the score, there's a pretty good chance you're doing it for a reason that won't apply in the part. If I go to, what is that, the viola part? No, that's the cello part. If I go to the cello part and look at letter D, that confusion doesn't exist because that chord symbol isn't there. On the other hand, there is a rehearsal mark here, and so maybe I make a different adjustment to avoid that rehearsal mark, but I don't want that to reflect in the score, right? So manual adjustments to position and a lot of other manual adjustments you make are maintained independently so that you can do the things that you generally would want to do when working with parts. But actually changing the notes, actually changing the music itself is always synchronized. So in theory, we do the right thing by default. And if there's some special case where you really do want to move that symbol both in the score and the parts, well, you're welcome to do it. You just have to do that a little more manually. So I did it there, and then I can go over to the part and do the same thing. And then you have the opportunity to fine-tune how it works in the score versus the part also. It's one of the things that is sort of on the long-term agenda is to provide a little more control of this so that maybe while you're moving a symbol, you could hit a button that says, go ahead and make the same change in the part. Or while you're changing a pitch in the score, say, don't change that in the part. You know, there's things like that that are on the long-term agenda to add that control. It's really one of the first things I remember requesting back when I first started using MuseScore 1, even before MuseScore 1 released. There was already work being done on this whole linked parts stuff, and I was testing it and said, yeah, it works great, but it would be really nice to be able to break the link sometimes so that you'd make a change in the score, not affect the part, or to force something to be linked that isn't. So I put in a feature request for that 13 years ago. But, it might actually happen within the next year or two. So these are some things that I wanted to be showing you about parts. There's something else that's really common to want to do that, let me just undo all my changes here because, in fact, I think to be safe, I'm just going to close this score and reopen it because I want to make sure I'm working with the original version of the score so I can show you this thing here. Right now, the violin 1 and violin 2 are on 2 staves. Well, that's how it's normally done. But if this had been flutes instead, if this had been an orchestra score and I had 2 flutes here instead of 2 violins, the normal thing is to have your 2 flute parts on a single staff in the score and then have separate parts for them. So let's talk about how to do that. I'm going to show you how to do that. It was possible in MuseScore 3, but it was somewhat clumsier. And again, you were much more locked in. I'm going to show you how to do this in MuseScore 4. It's still, you're not going to figure it out on your own, pretty much guaranteed. But it is possible. It's a little simpler and definitely more flexible. So let's talk about how to get these parts together. So I want to get the violin 1 and the violin 2 part onto the same staff. That's the first thing I want to do. Well, that part is really easy. I'm going to select the 2 staves. So I click violin 1, click violin 2 in the first measure, and then Control, Shift, End to select to end a score. So you can see I now have violin 1 and violin 2 selected throughout the entire score, right? What I want to do now is combine them onto one staff. MuseScore's got me covered here. I'm going to go to Tools, Implode. So if we look at what's going on at letter A, you can see the parts are separate. When I hit Implode, there you can see that the violin 2 part has now been copied onto the violin 1 part as separate voices, which is what I want. Now I don't need that violin 2 part anymore, so I can just hide it. And now I've got both my violin 1 and violin 2 here on the same staff. Well, let's talk now about getting separate parts for it. Actually, because it's going to bug me otherwise, I'm going to change the name of this. I don't want it to say violin 1. I want it to say violin 1 and 2. So I'm going to come over here to the staff name. I'm going to click the icon here, and instead of say violin 1, I'm going to say violins and violins. There we go. So I got my violins part going on. And now let's talk about getting separate parts for these. So it's all nicely done. Notice how fast that was. That implode just did the job lickety-split. That's how I would recommend doing this, personally. Go ahead and enter your flute 1 and flute 2, oboe 1, oboe 2, etc. Do them on separate staves, but then when you're done, implode. And now it's going to be all nicely set up in multiple voices for you. So I've got the 2 parts in multiple voices. Let's look now at creating parts for them. So I'm going to go to the parts window here, but I'm not going to use the default violin 1 and violin 2 parts because those are kind of tied to the individual instruments. In other words, this is going to show everything on the violin 1 staff. This is going to show everything on the violin 2 staff. I'm going to create my new split parts. So I'm going to say create part and then rename and call this, I'll just call it violin 1. Ooh, name already exists. Look at that. Wow. All right, fine. You know what? you know what? I'm not gonna worry about it. I am gonna reuse the existing ones. Dang it! So I'm gonna delete that part. Let's go ahead and open the violin 1 part and the violin 2 parts. I'll just open all. Look at the violin 1 part, and what we can see here is it's showing both voices of the violin 1 instrument. All I have to do is say, you know what, don't show me voice 2. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to the Instruments panel, open up the violin 1, and then click the gear icon for the staff and uncheck voice 2. And boom, voice 2 is gone. Simple as that. Now I can go to the violin 2 part, which is currently showing me that violin 2 staff, but that's not really what I want here. I want it to be showing me the violin's staff, right? I want it to be showing me the violin's staff, but voice 2 of it, right? So I'm going to open up my violin's staff, close the violin 2, close the eye for the violin 2 staff, and now I'm going to go again, open up the violins, click the gear icon on the staff, and hide voice 1. So it's the same basic thing, but now this is tied to the right staff. So if I go back to my score and I see violin 2 starts with a D, if I hit down arrow, make it a D flat, and go to my violin 2 part, it's a D flat, right? So it's as easy as that to have multiple parts generated from separate voices on a single staff. Again, it was possible in MuseScore 3, but considerably more awkward, and then you couldn't change your mind later. So these are, the things that I knew I wanted to show about how parts work. There's a few other things that I'll talk about. So let's come over here and I guess I closed the score already. So I'm going to undo some of my changes. Let's go ahead and talk about formatting. Let's say I start to do some formatting here. Actually, I'll redo that change. I'm just going to close this part. Let's look at our violin 1 part and say I want to do some formatting here. I want to add that line break there, and then I'll add a line break here, and I add some line breaks, etc. That's the kind of formatting I do. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the formatting that I typically do in a minute, but first I just want to show another new thing that exists in MuseScore 4, but this one is only in 402. So this one you won't be able to do for a few more days. But if I've made all this formatting here and then decide, you know what, I just want to start over. I just want to start over with this part. In MuseScore 3, you could delete the part and then recreate the part, and that would start over. In MuseScore 4, in 402 anyhow, it's simpler. I'm going to go to parts. I'm going to click that ... next to violin 1 and just say reset. Am I sure I want to reset it? So look at the fact that those system breaks are there. I say yes, and boom, the system breaks are gone. So the ability to easily reset a part, to get it back to how it started. It even reset it back to be both voices here. So resetting a part to easily get back to a clean slate is also going to be a nice fix if there's any errors that have crept in. Every once in a while a score gets corrupted, and 4.0.0 definitely had a bug. 2 different bugs that caused parts to get corrupted annoyingly often. 4.0.1 fixed that bug so that parts won't get corrupted nearly as often. But if the part is already corrupt, it's already corrupt. 4.0.2 now has that nice reset button, and that will it won't fix all corruptions, but it will fix the specific corruptions that those particular bugs would have created. So let's talk a little bit more about the formatting. Let me close that violin 1 part and just look at my viola. I'm going to look at this viola here and talk about what sort of formatting I would actually typically do here. Now this gets to be very subjective, okay? Every release of MuseScore has gotten better about how your part looks by default. Each version has more automatic features that will make things look better, make things look good out of the box. But what I will say is the spacing here is pretty tight. I mean, yeah, that's kind of a lot of music. That third system, especially, that feels like kind of a lot of music to fit on one system. If it's a really long piece and that's going to save you a page somewhere, great. But I think for my tastes, that's too tight. And if I look at my whole score here, you can see the entire part is only 2 pages long, and the second page has room to spare. So I kind of want to make my spacing a little looser. I don't want to do that in the score. There's no reason to in the score. I only want to do that in the parts. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Format, Style, and Measure, or it'll say Bar in the UK. And I'm going to increase this spacing ratio. The two main settings to play with are spacing ratio and minimum note distance. Hey, look at this. I've actually customized the minimum note distance and made it in this part different than the default. So actually, I'm just going to reset it to the default here. And I'm going to reset the minimum measure width to the default also. And now I'm going to take another look at if this already just makes it look better. Hey, you know what? That basically made everything look pretty much better, except now it doesn't quite fit on 2 pages anymore, right? So it's just barely not fitting. All right, I'm going to go back to that same dialog and just see if I can finesse this a little bit. So I'm going to go back to Format, Style, Measure, and I'm just going to see if I can just reduce the spacing ratio just a tiny bit to get it to fit. So from 1.4, actually, yeah, it could either be the minimum measure width. Any of these settings might be the magic one that gives me the answer that I want. So I don't know ahead of time which it might be, but I'm going to try reducing minimum note distance 1 notch to 0.4. Hey, look at that. Now I've only got one measure floating. That might be good enough. So I think I'm going to go with that and then see if I can get that measure to join the previous measures by selecting them all and then reducing stretch just on that system. There you go. I've just managed to get this score to fit onto 2 pages, but be a little more spacious than it was before. So I like to use style settings where possible to get the overall spacing to look decent. One reason I like doing it with style settings is then it's preserved as I edit. If I'm sitting here manually stretching individual measures and adding breaks here and there, I'm going to have to redo that work on every part, and I'm going to have to redo that work as I make any edits. Because suddenly those adjustments where I put in manual line breaks and things won't necessarily make sense. So I like to get the style setting to give me an overall look that I want. Now that I've got that overall look the way I want, I can go back to Format, Style, and this time hit the button that says Apply to All Parts. When I hit the Apply to All Parts button, now if I take a look at the cello part, it's going to have a similar look and feel. And yes, this one, the cello part, is busier than the viola part was, so it's not going to fit onto 2 pages, and I'm okay with that. But, all right, let's talk about what I do want here. Like I said, I really don't want... I'm not going to try to force this onto 2 pages because it's going to be too crowded, but I don't want that third page to be so empty. That looks kind of silly, and it makes the first 2 pages look too crowded. So on this part, I might try to actually just increase the spacing and see if that does it. Because that's going to be easier than going through system by system and adding breaks. So let me show you a couple different ways I could do this. One way is if I just go to Format, Style, Measure, and increase the spacing ratio. I played with the other setting last time. This time I'm going to use spacing ratio. And just start increasing it until that third page starts filling up better. I think that filled up too much. So let's come back down to 1.9 and there we go. It's fitting there. Now what I don't know is if that really was too much when I turned it all the way up to 2. So Format, Style, Measure, Let's go all the way up to 2. Yeah, that pushed it onto another page. So there you go. Or I could reset the minimum note distance also. Hey, it still fits on 2 pages. So I might do something like that. Just use the style settings to stretch things out, for the whole part. Because this part has its own style settings. I didn't hit the apply to all parts button. So it's still the case that the viola part is still going to fit nicely onto 2 pages, even though I've been fiddling with the style setting on the cello part. So you want to get some style settings synchronized between all your parts by hitting that apply to all parts button. But then you might want to go to individual parts and tweak their style settings to give you more the spacing you want. So this fills up those 3 pages nicely. I mean, I had 3 pages before, but now I have 3 pages that look a little more nicely spaced. But nicely spaced isn't the same as better. Okay? So let's talk about one of the things that's not good here. Take a look at letter N. Here's a start repeat. And then the top of the next page is 2 more measures in the end repeat. So the repeat crosses a page break. That's bad, right? For one thing, imagine if your stand is only wide enough to show 2 pages at a time, you're going to have the first and second page up at the beginning, and then you're going to have to turn pages in the middle of that repeat. No, you don't want to do that, right? So you might have to turn, see if you can get the second and third pages onto the stand together and turn some other time. But what if they're front and back on a piece of paper? You don't want repeats to be split across pages. And not just that, but there's other things where you just might not want it to be the way it is. Like, I don't know, this little phrase here that's going, and then it ends on a whole note. And that whole note is on the next system. And I'd probably be happier with that whole note at the end of the previous system so that letter K could start on a system, right? So there's all sorts of subjective decisions to make here about where you actually want your system breaks and where you actually want your page breaks. So with that in mind, I'm going to go back to Format, Style, and this time I'm going to say Reset All Styles to Default. And instead of letting, so I'm back to my default styles here where things are too crowded on the first 2 pages, too spacious on the last page. But this time I'm going to add my own system breaks and try to be a little more intelligent about where they occur. So, for instance, where's that repeated section that was at letter N? I might put a system break right there at the beginning of letter N and another system break right at the end of letter N so that that section is on a system all by itself. Right? Where was that other place I was talking about? Letter K, I might put a system break. This right now it's not there. You really have to work from the beginning forward for most things. So, I might look at this and say, where do I want things to happen? Where do I want the breaks to happen? I, coming from a jazz background, have a preference for getting rehearsal letters at the beginnings of systems. This is by no means a standard thing that you should always shoot for. But it's pretty common in jazz parts, I find, to see the letter name synchronized at the beginnings of systems. It's less common if you're also numbering all the measures in your score, but that tends to be less common in jazz because of the chord symbols that tend to get in the way, and I find it cluttered to see measure numbers everywhere, personally. I'm a fan of rehearsal marks over measure numbers everywhere. I'm fine with the measure numbers at the beginning of the system, but different editors do things differently. So I'm just going to show you my thing. I might look at letter B and say, hey, let's get letter B at the beginning of a system, and then say, hey, look, letter C almost fits. Let's see if I can select all those measures and reduce stretch. Well, let's put a break first on that, and now I'm going to reduce the stretch on all the measures of letter B. So I select those measures, reduce stretch 1 notch. There we go. In general, I don't want to compress things more, right? I'm trying to spread things out more. So for things like letter C, where there's 3 measures left over here, I'm not going to try to force all that onto one system. I don't want it more crowded. I want it less crowded on average. So, that's a good question. Is chat locked up? Am I missing some chat stuff, or are people just mesmerized here? So, Dave, that's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to about the chat, so I need to come back and find the window where I'm at and see if there's other stuff. No, I think there just wasn't any comments for a little while. So so I'm just going on and on. So anyhow, letter B, I didn't mind compressing that a little bit because yeah, I felt I could get away with it. But again, I want in general the overall effect here for my score to be more spacious. I want to fill out that third page. So for letter C here, I look at this and say, yeah, if I want that, if I want letter D to start on a system, then I want letter C to take up two full systems. So what I might do is count the number of measures there: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You probably thought it was going to be 8 bars because a lot of music is 8-bar phrases, but I kind of know this piece has a lot of 10-bar phrases, so I kind of expected that. So I might go through and, I don't want to break in the middle. I don't want to break 5 and 5 because ding, ding, gong is one gesture. So I might put the break after that or before it, and I have to decide which looks better. So I might try something like this. Yeah, that looks pretty decent. Or I could delete that break and add one after measure 6 and see which of the two I like better. And I don't know, I think I like the other one better, but whatever. So this process of going through and adding breaks to try to make sure that a break doesn't happen in the middle of something important, and specifically, you don't want to have a page break. Interesting that Marla, you lost audio, but it came back. But yeah, I think there just wasn't really any activity in the chat, either because no one cares about parts, or because you're digging it and just soaking it all in, or planning on checking it out during the replay. I don't know which it is. But this process that I'm talking about now of going through and deciding where you want your breaks to be for most readability, this is the most subjective, the most sort of, I don't know, artistic, expert level, a lot of things that you might do in MuseScore in generating parts is knowing what buttons to press. You just know how to do this, and now it does that thing. This isn't just knowing what buttons to press. This is having a clear vision in your mind of where you think you're going to get the most readability. And there's not necessarily great answers like I can't just tell you, oh, if you do this, it's going to be the most readable. So this thing that I'm doing of making rehearsal letters start at the beginning of systems, yeah, it's a jazz thing. You show this to an orchestra person and they might look at it and go, that's silly. So it's subjective. But the general idea that we're trying to put our breaks in places that space the score reasonably, so you don't end up with situations like I have 2 crowded pages and a loose page. You don't want that. You want 3 relatively evenly spaced pages. You want that, but you also don't want to interrupt a phrase so that someone's like reading all these complicated 16th notes and then suddenly has to jump over to the beginning of the next system. So complicated passages like that shouldn't be broken up. A lot of music breaks up into 2-bar units. And so I don't like to break up a 2-bar unit, So if you've got an 8-bar phrase or that 10-bar phrase, that's why I didn't break it up 5 and 5, because that 10-bar phrase is really 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And so I will put in my breaks I will figure out the end of the 2s. So, Bob, I would say, if there was a question that is still saying sending, it must not have gone through, and just ask it again. Meanwhile, but I'm happy to go back and talk about it. Marcelo, is there a way to assign different instruments to different voices in an imploded part? Yeah, did you miss that? Because I covered that maybe 20 minutes ago. So I did cover that, but yeah, it's still there actually. If I go to my parts here, go to my violin 1 part, and say open selected. Here's the violin 1 part with the 2 voices. All I did was go over to the instruments panel and then say, open it up to show it staves, click the staff, click the gear icon, and say, I don't want to see voice 2. Boom. That's it. So it's as simple as that. You have a part that's showing both voices for a staff, and you just tell it which one to not show. So how to reduce stretch. So yes, I did that on one example, but I didn't really talk about how I did it. To reduce stretch, which is how you squeeze more measures onto a system. Like let's say that I wanted to get looking for a good opportunity here, but let's just say I want to get these. I'm looking for one that makes musical sense. So give me a second because I'm that kind of guy. I just want to get that last measure onto the same system as letter D. I want to select all of the measures that I want to squeeze together. Click the first measure of D, shift click the last measure of D. So now all those measures are selected. The shortcut to reduce stretch is left curly brace. When I press left curly brace, it's going to compress the spacing of those measures. Sometimes you might have to compress it several notches. It's going to compress it by 10% at a time. So it might take several notches. And if you press it and press it and press it and press it and nothing's happening, it's because you've hit up against that minimum note distance, and you'll have to reduce the minimum note distance that I showed earlier. But left curly brace will compress the spacing. So if it's possible, and you want to do it with all of those measures selected. You don't want to just select one measure and compress its spacing, because I could do it, but like if I selected, say, just that first measure and compressed its spacing, if I compress it enough, I might eventually, let me try compressing just the second measure. Okay, I eventually get that last measure to fit. But now look what's happened here. My spacing isn't consistent. My first two measures are tighter than the rest, even though they have exactly the same rhythm. So you generally don't want to be messing with stretch measure by measure. You're going to want to select all the measures you want on a single system and then reduce their stretch together. So what I would do right now to make sure I'm back where I started is select them all and then go to Format, Stretch, Reset Layout Stretch to make sure they're back where I started, and then with all of them still selected, hit my left curly brace. So, Bob, yeah, that's a really good question. When I was moving the dynamic and I was talking about like musical content is synchronized and formatting is not. I didn't use those words, but if I had to summarize the difference, that's it. Musical content is synchronized. Formatting of it is not. So really what it comes down to is that was the basic principle. But then, someone would say, you know what, there's this thing that's being synchronized that I don't think should be, and enough people agree with it, and so we go in and tweak the code to make an exception for that case. Or there's something that isn't being synchronized and someone thinks it should. Did that what I said? Whichever way, if there's something that enough people think should be synchronized that isn't, then we'll go in and add a synchronization for it, or vice versa. When I say we, I mean I was heavily involved in doing that sort of work for the last 10 years. I haven't been involved in that work recently, and now the people who are involved with that sort of work are looking at, okay, let's stop this like piecemeal stuff, which, yeah, I'm fine with. I'd much rather see a global set of controls for really taking control of this. But in general, we try to do what you expect. And the general separation is musical content versus formatting. And musical content will also include things like tempo. So if I change this tempo from 126 to 120, I'd better hope that that's not only in the part, that that's also in the score. So when I go to the score, there it is. Or if I change that rehearsal letter from rehearsal letter A to Z, I'd better hope that all the parts are now showing a Z at the beginning, because otherwise rehearsal is going to be a disaster, right? So musical content also includes, not just the actual notes, but the stuff that you expect to be content in general, things that you expect to be synchronized. Anything that you're only fiddling with over here in a properties panel is probably not synchronized. Anything that you're doing by adding something to the score or removing from the score is synchronized, but also editing of text. I don't know. It's going to be one of these things where you try it and figure it out, and if something seems like it's off, we can discuss it. Now, there was another question. Is any of this going to show up in the course itself, Joanne? So I would say everything that I've talked about is in the course, except this subjective stuff about how you decide where breaks should go, right? That subjective kind of stuff is more the kind of stuff that I'm going to be doing during these live sessions here. But everything talked about how to generate the parts, how to format the parts, how I went ahead and changed the style settings, how I selected measures and reduced stretch, all of that stuff is in the course, right? It's either in the parts section if it has to do with parts specifically, or it's in the formatting section if it's about how to change the formatting of things. So everything that I'm talking about is in the course, other than this really subjective stuff about deciding where do you think you want your system breaks, because it's subjective. All right, so I want to see if I've missed something else here, but Marcelo, is there a way to change the instrument which will play the voice? Oh, you mean, Marcelo, so you're not talking about parts, you're not talking about the appearance of the parts, you're just talking about the playback. So yeah, to change the playback sound, check this out. Change the playback sound for this viola part. If I play this, it's playing with viola sound. I'm actually listening to this going, what the heck? What the heck? Because I see a line going up and it played down. Maybe that's because I was editing something funny in it. So I don't know. But that's very strange. Huh. It's playing, I think, a different passage entirely, and I don't know why. So I'm not going to worry about that, but I'll try to figure it out later. Anyhow, if I open the mixer right now, you'll see that the viola is using viola solo. Well, I can come over here and go to Muse Sounds and say, hey, I want it to sound like a horn in F. And now when I play this, I have no idea what it's playing. It's probably something about that repeat that's messed up, but I don't know. But in any case, it's definitely playing like a horn. So the thing so you can easily select individual Muse sounds. If you want to select from a sound font, the MS Basic sound font is what comes with MuseScore. But you can see here that I have exploded that sound font into all the different sounds that are within MS Basic. I posted this. In fact, this was the tip of the week in the newsletter yesterday, right? It was you can just download the zip file, and now I can choose the music box sound. Right? So it's playing back. Oh, I know what the problem is. I actually know what the problem is. It's why it's not synchronized is because I changed the tempo. And sometimes when you change the tempo, it takes a minute for it to catch up. That's sort of like a known bug. But I'm going to go and... There we go. Haha. So if you install that zip file that I posted as part of the tip of the week in the newsletter, or just go to the community and look at the tip of the week space, you'll see where I posted that. It's also, there's a copy of that same post under resources. I originally posted it to resources, then I decided I'd make it a tip of the week, so I just copied the post. So anyhow, that post has a link to the zip file. You download it, install it, and then all you got to do is, when you look at your sound fonts list, you will see all of the sounds that exist. So that's how you change sounds. You can either pick a Muse sound here, pick a sound font, or if you are on Windows or Mac and you have VST instruments installed, you can select one of those. All right. So, the retrograde thing. I did see the question about that, and then I lost where it was. Is it possible to mirror a system, play it backwards? So retrograde, if you're asking about retrograde, then yeah. So let me see. Is that what you're talking about? Is retrograde? Let's actually try it out because the retrograde plugin actually comes with MuseScore now. If I go to plugins, did I enable it? No, I haven't enabled it. But I'm going to go to manage plugins, and the retrograde plugin is here, and it's called called something. I thought it was called new retrograde, but I'm not seeing it. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Oh, it's hidden behind here. Hidden behind here. Um, New retrograde. I'm going to select the new retrograde plugin, which comes pre-installed. You just have to select it and enable it. Now I can go back to my score, and I'm going to select a passage, and here's a passage here. Dum bum bum dum, and I'm going to select it, and I'm going to go to plugins, composing arranging tools, new retrograde. Boom. Now it's backwards. So there you go. It apparently didn't do anything reasonable with the tie. So it's not a perfect plugin, but it's a start, right? So yeah, plug in what am I saying here? Yeah, that plugin will reverse it, but you might have to fiddle with things. Okay, so then Bob, that is a great observation, and yeah, thanks for helping me understand Marcelo's original question, which is about the two voices having different playback sounds. So the short answer is no, you can't do that. But what can you do? You can use the trick that we started off this whole session with, which is having an invisible staff. So you have one staff for show that has the two voices combined, but then you also have their individual staves still in the score hidden to play. So you have the combined staff that shows but doesn't play, and then you have the two original staves hidden that will play but not show. So there you go. All right, so glad I got to address those questions there, but now we've gone more than long enough, so we're going to finish up here. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for helping me understand some of the questions. Next week, I'll be here with the score of the month, which will be, if you go to the notation project I talked about in the newsletter, we're going to be taking a look at the Music Masterclass theme music and talk about entering that into MuseScore, what's involved in doing that. It involves parts, so you get to see that. You get to see some, string notations and things. So by all means, try your hand at it. I encourage you to go to the notation project space, try your hand at entering the score yourself, see what comes up, so you have some questions for me. Tomorrow, Music Masterclass, we're going to talk all about my basic music theory cohort course that we're about to launch. Really excited about that. So I hope to see a lot of you tomorrow. All right? See ya hopefully tomorrow, and if not, when I see ya.